Welcome to Integrated. This is the podcast where we seek to bridge the gap between the intellect and the will so that we can grow as disciples of Christ, surrendering all that we are and all that we have to the truth. Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Angela Erickson, and I'm really excited to share this episode with you. Today I interviewed my very dear friend, Brian Gibson. He is the president of Pro-Life Action Ministries here in Minnesota, and they are a sidewalk counseling organization. They're probably the oldest sidewalk counseling organization in the entire country. And I'm really excited about this interview. We talked about so many different things. He's been doing this work for decades, and I trust him more than I trust most people in terms of seeing and understanding what's going on nationally and locally, to be honest. He just has such a great grasp of everything with a bird's eye view, but also has the heart of a lion and a teddy bear. He's been a dear friend of mine now for years. We do a radio show here locally in the Twin Cities. If you're local here, you may have heard us on our show, Living the Gospel of Life, on Relevant Radio, 1330 a.m. in the Twin Cities. So Brian, since we started doing this podcast, since we started doing this radio show, over 6 years ago, he's been one of the few people in my life that I talk to at least once a week. And I have to say, he's not going to like me saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. He really is a father figure to me in my life. And he treats me like his own daughter. And I'm very grateful for him in so many ways. He's always been such a great example to me. And even in those small few areas that maybe we disagree on something, he is so respectful. He like last week, for example, I'm just going to tell you the kind of guy he is. Last week when we went to go testify at the state capitol, or 2 weeks ago by the time you're hearing this, he was the guy. I had all 5 of my kids, and he had me pull up. I grabbed all the kids out of the van. He basically was my valet. He went and found parking for me down in the cities. He paid for my parking. He brought me my van back when we were done testifying. And he just does it with so much joy and service. And I really admire him. I look up to him. I hope that when I grow up, that I am half the person that he is. I think we need more Brian Gibsons in the world, and I'm very grateful to call him a dear friend of mine. So, Brian, if you're listening to this, thank you for thank you for being such a great role model for me. Oh my goodness, I didn't think I would cry, but I'm just very excited to share this interview with you guys. Brian he's a great friend. So we talked about everything from the FBI and how they're cracking down on pro-life work right now, as well as what's going on locally in the Twin Cities. And even we talk about the FDA now allowing mail order abortion, basically buying the abortion pill and having it sent to your home. That's now, apparently we can do that now. So that. And then I also wanted to make sure I talked to him about his beginnings in the pro-life movement and what keeps him going. Because if you've been doing pro-life work for kind of long time, it can be tiresome, and it can be discouraging at times without God's grace. And why you should be doing pro-life work, what's so important about it, if the slaughter of innocent children isn't reason enough, but what's that disposition we need to have as Catholics. So, Brian, thanks for coming on, and I hope that you guys really enjoy this interview. A quick aside before we hit play on that. If you are interested in supporting the podcast, please hit like, subscribe. Make sure you share this episode with your friends and family. Also, you can become a patron over on Patreon or give a one-time gift on my website. You can use the link on all of my social media pages, the little link in the bio. You can send in a one-time gift just to support the costs, paying off the costs for having this podcast. I would really appreciate it if you're not interested in becoming a patron. Lastly, I have a really great announcement. If you missed it last week in my episode or the last couple of times I've recorded things, You can get 10% off at my friend's shop, Star of the Sea Gifts. Lauren creates beautiful rosaries, paintings, and other fun goods that you can buy, and they make wonderful gifts. Her rosary is my favorite rosary that I've ever had, probably. So definitely recommend you look at her work. There's a code in the description box, or there's a link in the description box. You can use the code integrated10 to get 10% off. And by doing so, you will also be supporting my show. So I really appreciate it. Any help that we can get here so that this show can keep going, and we can get you more interviews like the one you are about to hear. Thank you so much for listening to Integrated, and God bless you. You look
No, I look
excellent.
gray. I look gray.
Oh, no, you look great.
I look gray.
Well, thank you, Brian. You are a longtime friend of mine, and I'm really excited to finally have you on my podcast, Integrated. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me on it. I'm just honored to be invited to do this with you. And yes, we've been friends for quite a while now.
Yeah, we've done so much work together. You've kept me in the pro-life movement almost single-handedly just by making me call you every week to do the radio show.
Well, okay. If that's what's kept you in, then I'm glad we're doing it together. So
yeah.
This will sound very mutual admiration for a moment or two, but Angela, you are absolutely phenomenal on the radio with me every week, and so this has been, it's been very good. So,
Thank you.
and I'm glad you're on my board, and so forth and on and everything. So,
yeah,
you seem to be a pretty good mom too.
I'm okay. I'm okay. I've got a lot of work to do.
I saw all 5 of them together at the state capitol here last week, and those are well-behaved kids.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm trying my best. I fail almost every day, but trying my best. But I've just sort of learned that that's how every parent feels about raising their children anyway. So I once was told by, I can't remember, she was a type of therapist that we were seeing for a while for Elijah. And she said, in my experience, the parents who don't think that they're bad parents are bad parents. And I thought, that's insightful. So anyway, well, we are here to talk about what the pro-life movement is facing in a post-Roe world. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Minnesota, but I mean, there's just so much to cover. I mean, we need to talk about what's going on with the FBI cracking down on pro-life activism, especially sidewalk counseling, which is you and your work, especially at Pro-Life Action Ministries. That's what you guys are doing. But also, I mean, we could talk about the radical pro-abortion legislation that's going through. I mean, it's just on and on and on. So what do you think would be the best thing to start with? What do you want to start with?
Well, let's do the FBI. Let's do the FBI stuff first. Sure.
So, okay, let's talk about how many people we've seen. We've seen several pro-life activists, especially those who are sidewalk counselors, who have supposedly violated the FACE Act. Let's talk about what the FACE Act is and how that's impacting sidewalk counseling across the nation.
Well, the FACE Act was actually passed into law and signed into law during the Clinton era. So this is back in the early 1990s. And this was when there was a large effort in the pro-life movement to do what was called rescue missions, Operation Rescue. There was Christians were going to abortion facilities and sitting in front of the doors and peacefully praying and engaging in civil disobedience, blocking the entrances so that babies wouldn't be killed that day, and to bring attention to the issue, which is what civil disobedience is all about in reality. So that was being done very prayerfully. These were like prayer meetings. It was like it was their prayer meetings right in front of the doors of an abortion facility, and they were growing, and they were large, and they were happening all over the United States. And in response to that, the federal government passed what is called the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. And it made it a federal felony to block access to abortion facilities. Now, in order to pass this legislation, they needed some Republicans to join some Democrats, and they needed a handful of pro-life Democrats to also join in with the handful of pro-abortion Republicans were out there in that era, and they decided the compromise is that this law would also apply at churches and places of worship, so that you're not allowed to block the entrances to a place of worship.
That's really interesting that they would conflate abortion clinics with churches.
Oh, it's more than interesting.
The irony, and but really, and we've talked about this too on our radio show, that abortion is the anti-sacrament of the enemy, of the devil. I mean, it's like you have the complete inverse of the Eucharist, and it's meant to mock our Lord in the Holy Eucharist and mock Our Lady, who was the living tabernacle. She is the living tabernacle of our Lord, the new Ark of the Covenant, and the new Eve. So, Brian, when you got into this work, however many years ago, I won't say how many.
I'm not sure if I will either.
You've been doing this for most of your life. I mean, what was it that?
Geez, you had to put it that way.
Well, I have too. I mean, let's see.
It's true, but yeah.
I've been doing this for over a third of my life now. So I mean, I'll get there soon enough. But when you started, what was kind of the impetus? Are you surprised by that?
I just had to think about where I'm at in this process. So, I don't often take time to reflect on how long I've been involved. I just keep going. But getting involved, well, in this was early 1980s. I mean, very early 1980s. 1981 is when I first came across the two men who started what became Pro-Life Action Ministries, and one of them, and they went on to also found the Franciscan Brothers of Peace here in the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis. Very good friends, and Brother Michael was the one that was just so inspirational. And I had just come into understanding my Catholic faith in a new way. I had, I often call it people call it reversion.
Yeah.
A conversion. I had a conversion, a very powerful, profound conversion experience in my early 20s. And I ran across these guys, and everything they were saying, especially what Brother Michael was saying about the importance of defending the unborn, of being Christ-like in our effort of protecting precious human beings from being killed that very day, everything resounded in my soul and in my heart. And
I had a similar experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got involved, and a few years later, they decided to make me the first non-brother hire for the organization. And then
you never left.
Well, they left it in my hands, which was crazy of them to do. They went on to work on this Franciscan Brothers of Peace, which they needed a lot of extra time to work with at one point there. So I became the executive director and have been running the organization ever since.
And when you started doing this, I mean, you kind of described it early in the pro-life movement. There were so many of these Red Rose rescues. At what point did you decide, like, hey, we need to start reaching out to these women? Because here's a little fun fact. I mean, for as many people who have heard about 40 Days for Life, I mean, you were doing similar work around the same time. Am I understanding that correct? Or maybe you were even doing the sidewalk counseling before them. From day one, they were doing sidewalk counseling. I didn't invent the sidewalk counseling. Brother Paul, the other one of those two, is the one that created this. He's the one that created the organizational structure of sidewalk counseling. It was the first formally organized sidewalk counseling in the nation. And that was in 1981. And he created that and then started training all over the country, including even at National Right to Life conventions. He was doing training sessions on sidewalk counseling. And so I kind of grew into it. It wasn't something, but we've always done sidewalk counseling. It's been, I call it the heart of our ministry. It's the mainstay of our day in and day out work. And it's simple. And yet, we've learned some of the complexities of how to reach out the best way possible, but it's still very simple in concept. It's offering the love of God and the wealth of help that's available to women who have scheduled abortion appointments, who are going into the abortion facilities, offering them that help and that love,
so that they decide not to go through with their abortion appointments.
Right.
And we have that help in our hands. We have it in our pockets. We have the places nearby. And in those early years, Angela, there were very few pregnancy help centers.
Right.
And
Yeah.
at
So that
one
had to
point,
be really hard.
yeah, well, it was more difficult, but we actually did our own crisis counseling in the office for a while until
Mm.
the growth of pregnancy help centers really came on the scene. Then we eliminated doing it because others were doing it and we could just refer. But for a while we had our own, and it was absolutely necessary.
Wow. That's just incredible to me. That's a lot to take on too, just as an organization, to have so many moving parts. It's nice when you can specialize in an area, get really, really good at it, and hopefully work with other great organizations in the area. And that's one thing too. I mean, here in St. Paul, many people don't know, but we have a massive Planned Parenthood, and you guys are
Yes.
outside there every single day. It is the highest volume. I've heard you say it over and over again. It is the highest volume Planned Parenthood in the nation. And you're out there day in and day out helping women choose life, and there's a pregnancy center just a couple of blocks away. So how has that changed your sidewalk counseling? And then when you look at kind of what's going on, so I guess two questions. When you see how much the pro-life movement has expanded over the years, I mean, you have a great bird's eye view because you've been doing it for so long. Like, one of the things that really frustrates me, and I've commiserated with you about this before, but you get these really young pro-lifers who come into the movement who think that they know everything, and they can't understand why things are being done, or they think that they're doing it way better than everybody else. There's kind of this narcissism where they come in and they just assume like they're going to do it. They're going to be the ones who end abortion, as if you guys haven't been laying the groundwork for decades, as if you haven't been in the Capitol working with legislators and doing all this stuff on the ground. There is kind of this arrogance that I see in these youthful pro-life activists. So how has that changed as organizations have sort of grown and the pro-life movement has sort of gained steam over the years? That's my first question. I'll leave it there.
Okay. Well, first of all, I was that arrogant young person at one point.
Aren't we all?
We all were. I mean, we
Yeah.
were in our, when
Yeah.
we formed this, when this organization was formed, I think I was 23 or 24 years old. Okay. So just post-college age. The guys that founded it, one was Brother Michael was in the minor seminary, the undergraduate program at the University of St. Thomas. Brother Paul was in the postgraduate major seminary at St. Paul Seminary. And so they were college kids. That's who we were. I mean, we're just young. And there was no instructions. There was nothing out there. It was just make it up as you go along. And we,
Make it.
we trusted God. We believed that we were hearing from God. And in many cases we were, and in many cases we were not. And we learned as we went along, and we brought in others who were very wise and very good at what they were doing, and but not much, still the same age range all the time. So
Yeah.
by the time I was leading Pro-Life Action, I started leading Pro-Life Action Ministries. I was approaching 30. I was really old.
How dare you? I'm 30.
Well, I was really old. I was just about to turn 30, and I'm taking over an organization, and there was a whole lot to do from there yet. And so when somebody comes in who's new and fresh, I guess I'm a little more forgiving of it than you might be from your perspective, which you
No,
just
I need to work in that area.
we were that way. I mean, we were that.
Yeah.
So,
Oh yeah. I mean, when I worked at Students for
Yeah.
Life of America, I thought I knew everything. I was told I
Right.
knew everything, kind of. I
Right.
mean,
right.
yeah.
So with that, that's been part of it. As I'm delighted to see all the people that are getting involved in the movement today,
Oh, absolutely. We
as
need
compared
them.
to what we used to
Yeah.
have. It's just amazing. And yeah, it gets a little frustrating once in a while when you have to answer the same thing that won't work for the 15th or umpteenth time, as my father
Yeah.
would say, but you just got to work with that and be patient, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How has it changed? I mean, it's sort of obviously going with the expansion of the pro-life movement. Then also you're seeing an expansion in terms of restriction against what pro-lifers can do, or
Yeah.
more moderation in terms, of government oversight. I mean, far more than you see within the abortion movement. So what has that been like for you in your work? Because as we've talked about with the FBI cracking down on people for supposedly violating the FACE Act, I mean, let's talk about a couple of those cases and how outrageous they are, and even how close to home that really hit with the FBI coming to talk to one of our own sidewalk counselors.
Well, Mark Houck in Philadelphia is the most prominent case of the FBI doing something that looks clearly like they should never have done.
Yeah.
He had violated nothing. The claim was that he had pushed down a volunteer from the abortion facility, and therefore that somehow was violating the FACE Act. And the circumstances were simple. He was defending his son. He had
Oh
his
yeah.
12-year-old boy with him. This man, this 70-some-year-old man, was getting in the face of his son, using obscenities and profanities, and it wasn't like he threw them at him by word and then let it go. He kept going toward the boy, kept getting closer and closer, right in the kid's face. And Mark stepped in between to defend his son and pushed the man to get him away from his son, and the man fell down. Now,
Mm-hmm.
there were no charges brought by the authorities. The man then tried to bring it into court on his own, and that got dismissed. And here it is 5 months after that point, and this is this past summer when it happened, when he got charged. The FBI show up at Mark's home, 40 miles away from where he sidewalk counseled, and came in force and took him away. So
Yeah, in front of
uh,
his whole family, all of his
right,
children at
right,
gunpoint. I mean, it was
right.
about as dramatic of a situation as it possibly could be for just a pro-life active. Not even, I mean, I sometimes I even hate to use the word activist. I mean, I consider myself an activist. I don't necessarily consider sidewalk counselors an activist in the traditional sense, because they're praying and offering resources. They're not, I mean, it's wild to me that we find that to be extreme today. And I remember being a young anti-abortion activist, kind of coming into this realm and thinking that maybe sidewalk counselors were kind of extreme, because I was like, I could see why somebody might think a woman is being shamed when she's going into abortion clinic. That was my mindset as a 20-year-old woman. And then you sort of mature and you see it for what it is. I mean, I think it's sort of that victim mentality, but then when you look at the situation objectively and you remove yourself from that emotionalism and that subjectivism, you see our sidewalk counselors are our last line of defense. And they're the only people out there day in and day out, rain, sunshine, snow in our case, below freezing, negative 30-degree weather. And yeah,
Only
there's
once, only once, only once.
but I mean, it's like these people are heroic in their efforts, and they're literally saving lives. I mean, they're saving
Yeah.
children out on the sidewalk. And to me, it's just so clear that these people understand the urgency of the matter. I think we sort of live in a time, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, because you know you see the bird's eye view probably better than I do. But I think so often, I don't know if it's just that we get tired or somewhat apathetic in our anti-abortion work, but it's almost like we forget that there are children being dismembered every single day. I mean, I testified this last week when we were in the committee hearing. It's like we have in the state of Minnesota, according to our last report, children being dismembered at a rate of 27 children per day by abortion. So more than one we'll have on average at least one child will die during the recording of this interview. And that's heartbreaking. And it's like we forget that because we don't see, it's this hidden thing that happens behind closed doors, and it happens hidden within the womb of the woman. And we have so many of these women walking wounded. And yet it's just so easy to forget that we're just having children slaughtered. So what is it that has kept you going and kept you from becoming apathetic? And what is it about sidewalk counseling that I think helps renew that sense of urgency within you and all of the people that are sidewalk counselors there at Pro-Life Action Ministries?
Boy, you ask compound questions.
I know. I'm sorry. It's because my brain, it's like I have I have a small thing, and then I'm like, but there's so much here.
There is.
You know me.
Okay. Well, first of all, doing this as long-term as I have, there is a certain passion that's within me that is not because of me.
Yeah.
Okay. I recognize that God has done something and he's not letting me out of it. Okay. It's kind of like that kind of
I feel that
an overwhelming sense sometimes. And there's been so many things that have happened along the way that have not only confirmed that, but also reaffirm it in profound ways. If I find myself not having as much thought about the urgency of the moment that I should have for what's really happening, I remember the babies that we found in the dumpster and we held in our hands. Mm. And just remembering that, thinking about them even for a moment, brings me back to that moment.
Can you tell that story? Because I think that's a really powerful story, and I think it's really important that people hear it.
Well, back in the late 1980s, a young man who was one of our sidewalk counselors, one of our volunteers, was also a licensed practicing nurse, and he was working overnight shifts. And there had been a lot of scuttlebutt in the pro-life movement across the country about this thought that they were throwing the remains of the babies in the trash dumpsters behind these abortion facilities. And so he had gone out to the Robbinsdale abortion facility after his overnight shift one night. It was early Monday morning that he had gone out there. I believe it was early Monday morning. Maybe it was Tuesday. But he had gone out there after his overnight shift. So it was before he was going to go to bed. Mm-hmm. And he just went up to the dumpster behind this abortion facility and grabbed 2 trash bags, threw them in his car, in the trunk of his car, and drove back to his home. Now, this is in January in Minnesota, so everything's frozen.
Yeah.
And so he got back to his home, and he went in the garage and he opened up the first bag, and right on the top, he saw the remains of a baby in there. And from over the weekend, the abortions they had done over the weekend at this location. So he called us, and now Brother Paul, who's passed away a few years ago now, and I went over to his home, and then we took the trash bags back to our office, and then we went through them, and we ended up finding 13 babies that had been aborted, the remains of 13 babies in the dumpster, ranging everywhere from about 6 or 8 weeks, just conception age, to about I think the oldest one was 18 weeks, somewhere in that range. So we just had this range of children that we had found that were in there, and by then it was pretty late in the evening, but we went into full action. The next morning we had a press conference to show the remains to the media, and all the media showed up. This is an era when television and print media like newspapers and radio was the way you got your news. There was no internet yet, but they all showed up. They took tons of footage and photographs and everything like that. Nothing got shown, by the way. And then a couple days later, we had a funeral for him, and we were able to pull that together pretty quick. And we had the children buried out at Resurrection Cemetery in Mendota, Minnesota. So that's the basic story there. But yeah, we held in our hands these tiny broken bodies, and they were whole. And you knew it was a human being. There was no doubt in anybody's mind looking at them. And so again, if I need to remind myself of what the urgency is, what is happening today, right now, with the killing of babies, all I have to do is think about that. And there's a mental picture that will never go away.
Yeah.
So things like that, just to keep me going.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think we all need to have those. I mean, maybe not quite as intense, those experiences are devastating. I think that's just for a special, God gives that to special people.
Well, my little girl, who's a little older than you are, Angela,
yeah,
our first adoptee, she was scheduled to be aborted 32 and a half years ago.
Yeah, I
and
love
this is a baby
story.
saved by one of our sidewalk counselors through the ministry. And my wife and I ended up being the ones selected by the birth mom to adopt her and raise her. And
That's so
and actually, that's a
beautiful.
story. I've only been telling a story recently in the last few years because she
Yep.
learned of it from her birth mom, who she reconnected with a few years ago, because we didn't tell her. But we knew it. We knew we had, a baby saved in the family every moment of every day.
That is just so incredible. But Brian, I've heard that pro-lifers are only pro-birth, and they don't do that.
Well,
how dare you?
I'm pro-living birth, not pro-death
yeah,
birth.
exactly.
That's what I am.
An important distinction.
So.
Oh, yeah, yes, you have lived such a it's so beautiful. Honestly, this is where I'm again the mutual admiration. I mean, you live, breathe, and walk out a culture of life, and you have lived that throughout the course of your life in your work, in your family. And I just think that there's so much there to admire. I just have so much respect for you.
Okay,
I
stop
tell
it,
people
stop it,
I'm
stop
not,
it, stop it,
you
stop it.
you are just the best. So anyway,
No. God is the best.
He
God
is.
is the
Amen.
good. God is the best. I
He
just
is.
happen to be the donkey he uses sometimes. Okay, that's it.
And a donkey you are.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. I hope so, because that's that story. The priest Melchizedek is on his way to bless the people of Israel, and Balaam does not want this to happen, so he goes to go.
Right.
He's on his donkey.
Yeah.
Of course, the Old Testament uses the word ass, and he's on his way to stop Melchizedek, and the donkey stops dead and won't move. And he's beaten on the donkey, and the donkey won't move. Finally, the donkey turns and looks at him and says, "There's an avenging angel of God standing right in front of you, and if you go a step further, you're dead." I'm paraphrasing, of course.
Yeah.
But it was like the donkey gave him the warning. So sometimes we get to be the donkey that gives the warning out there, and that's the job.
That's so funny, and of course, that's so fitting for Palm Sunday, right? You have our
Well,
Lord. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
but I mean,
yeah,
that's
exactly.
we're bringing Christ. Like that's what you're doing. So okay, post Dobbs. So we're seeing it all ramp up within the abortion issue. I mean, not only has there been so much violence perpetrated on pregnancy centers and pro-life organizations across the country, and now we're seeing even within the state of Minnesota. I did a live stream about this a week or two ago, talking about this. So I mean, I'm saying a week or two ago because we're recording this, and I probably won't get this out for another week. But we have been now seeing this full-on push in so many states, especially like Minnesota, to have abortion on demand through all 9 months of pregnancy, especially after an election cycle where we were constantly reminded that abortion's not on the ballot. So let's talk about it and from a perspective of legislation and what we can anticipate in terms of how we're going to move forward as a pro-life movement.
Well, first of all, the legislation that's in front of Minnesota has already happened in many states around the country. We're not the only ones having this happen. Some happening before the Dobbs decision. So Illinois passed a full-on abortion bill a couple of years ago. California, New York, and so forth. So there's several states that have already done this. It's now happening in our state, and I think there's efforts elsewhere. But the piece of legislation we're dealing with right now basically just says abortion with no regulation and no restrictions. And there's a difference between those two, regulations and restrictions. No restrictions, no regulations, no anything, right up to live birth, and don't get in the way of this. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on right now that we're trying to fend off. Uh, if it becomes law in Minnesota, it makes things harder to end abortion altogether.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to our basic work, like sidewalk counseling, being present for the moms out of these abortion facilities, nothing's changed. It's the same thing we've been doing for 42 years.
Right.
So, well, I think I just said how
Yeah,
long
but
we've been doing it.
yeah.
So how long
Yeah, but
I've been doing
you're
it.
trying to work yourself out of a job. Like
I
that's
am. I want
every
to end it.
pro-life
Right.
activist's
Right.
dream
If
is to
I'm,
work ourselves out of a job.
yeah, I'd like to close down the ministry. I'd like it to be over with. Yes, absolutely. And I want to see it happen before I go. And when I mean go, leave this mortal coil. So, but yeah, it's very disheartening. It's emotionally grueling.
Yeah.
To watch this process taking place, to hear so many people who are elected officials talking as if they work at or for or run an abortion facility.
It's been, oh
I mean,
my
they're
goodness, that
using,
hearing last week was
right.
disgusting.
And
Oh,
it's so extreme. And what's probably maybe even more troubling to me was the failure to point out how extreme this was in the last election by those who are running as pro-life people.
absolutely. It's
And I know
egregious.
there were great, real, good, even holy pro-life people running in this past election, but there were a lot of people running who simply were not what they said they were, and it's been very harmful to the babies.
Yeah.
And to our whole state, and to every state across the country where this has happened as well. Now, what else is happening post-Dobbs? The Biden administration is full on trying to enshrine abortion everywhere. So they have failed to be able to pull off the national legislation that they've tried to pull off. And exactly what's going on right now in Minnesota already has been tried at the federal level. And thank goodness there's enough votes prior to this past election. It was in the Senate. Now it's going to be in the House because they've taken control of the House. But there's enough votes to keep this type of thing from happening on a federal basis, which would negate all pro-life laws in every state of the United States had it passed nationally, right? Which is why they want to do that. But then there's the effort to do this in other means and other ways through the federal government, and the administration, the Biden administration, is doing this. It seems like it's all they're doing sometimes. So
between this and the transgender stuff, I just feel like it's social justice, equity, all of the garbage language that we're using to sort of, make things obscure. I mean, make truth obscure. It's a wild time to be alive.
Yeah, we call things rights that cannot be rights because they require the oppression of other people.
Right.
And you cannot have a human right cannot be a human right if another human being has to be oppressed in order for it to exist.
It is that simple. I just said that. I don't, if liberation means I have to kill my child, I don't want it. Mm-hmm. I don't want it. If that's what it means, if that's what liberation is to you, I don't want it. Get rid of it. I have no interest in murdering my child. And that's not to say we're not compassionate for those women who have chosen abortion. I think so many of them have been lied to. People ask me all the time if I think women who are having abortions should be, subject to the law insofar as they should be in jail or put up for the death penalty or something. And I don't believe that for a couple of reasons. One, I just think it would be really hard to, it'd be hard to understand why she chose the abortion if you're not asking her. And so many of these women are coerced into their abortions, whether it is outright coercion or soft coercion where there's an expectation that they should abort. And our culture has really created an environment where women are expected not to really have a family. And if they do, they're kind of pariahs for it because they're supposed to have a career. They're supposed to be productive and do something with their lives, because somehow motherhood is now a sort of degenerate calling for those of us who are so weak. And, how dare we want to serve our husbands and our families? We'd be much better if we were serving our bosses out in the world, even in those places wherein we're completely replaceable. So,
well, you enslaved mothers.
I know we're the worst.
Yeah.
But what has that
Look
been
awful
like for
happy to
you?
me.
I know. Gee, dang it. But like, what has that been like for you to see this? Because I mean, did you think when abortion was legalized? I mean, I've heard you describe what that day was like. It was so shocking to you, and to so many others. It was like no one almost could understand how that happened. And I sort of feel like we're having another one of those moments, especially here in Minnesota, where all of a sudden people are abortion will be legal through all 9 months without regulation or restriction. And a lot of people are going to be confused, like, how did that happen? How did I not know this was happening? Do you feel like we're kind of in another moment like that? And what was it like for you when Roe came down?
Well, yes, we are in a similar moment to some degree. I think anytime that that those who are peddling in death, the pro-abortion people, are pushing an agenda forward and winning with that agenda in the public sphere, it's disconcerting because I know overwhelmingly that people don't agree with this in large, people we know here, the majority of people think abortion's okay under some circumstances. Okay. I mean, we got to understand that reality. I mean, I'm in a minority. I'm against all abortions. I'm in a minority. I understand that. But if you look at the other end of the spectrum, those that believe full on all abortions, no matter what, they're in a smaller minority.
Yeah.
And so everything is in between those two is the majority of people that they don't agree with what's going on with this legislation at all. They're against it, but they don't know it. They don't know what's happening. And they don't know what's happening with, they don't even know what's happening with abortion to begin with.
No,
so
they don't
know that, I had somebody send me an email recently. He's angry because of some messaging we had out there telling me that I was so illiterate about the law because abortion is not legal after 24 weeks in Minnesota.
What? What are
when
you
did that
talking
happen?
about?
Because it's been legal past 24. It's been legal through all 9 months.
Go look at our abortion reports. You can see when they commit abortions past 36 weeks. I mean, you can even see that. It's right there in black and white.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's part of the problem is that the voting public out there is extraordinarily ignorant about this issue. Mm-hmm. And because of that, they don't vote well. So the only way, and the way our elections run, you've got, in this last election, the pro-abortion people were casting the light on the pro-life candidates as wanting full-on bans for all these reasons, and they painted how extreme it was to ban abortion.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there was no pushback. Usually there's pushback. Usually there's, well, look how extreme this is. And then the people kind of stay in the middle, and the voting is better. So
this time around, it was almost exactly the opposite. Instead of pushing back, they I'm thinking of one candidate in particular whose name is Scott Jensen. I'd love to talk to you. I'm going to call you out. I'm not on Relevant Radio today. I am on my own podcast. So I'm calling you out, sir. It's like he actually had that ad where he's holding his grandson, right? Or granddaughter.
It was a child. I don't know if it was
a child
or not. Yeah.
And he's talking about how he supports abortion. And it was just like, how tone deaf are you? How do you think this is helpful for us right now? It's just not.
No, I don't remember exactly what he said in the ad, but I remember some other interviews that he did, and he sounded like a moderate pro-abortion candidate to me. That was my assessment. Mm-hmm. So, and I understand now he's thinking about possibly being involved in politics further, but now as a so-called pro-choice candidate. So
Oh,
he's at least be
of
honest about
course.
that
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
exactly. It didn't work out for him to take advantage of other people this
Well,
time.
great harm has been done in the process. But okay, so back in 1973, I was in high school when this happened, and nobody saw it coming. I mean, quite frankly, I'm sure there were people who did, but there were so few people that were fighting against abortion then
Yeah.
compared to now. So few. And in fact, that was 1973. I got involved actively, really active in 1981 with Pro-Life Action Ministries. And in 1981, there were so few pro-life people out there, so
Mm.
few activists. And by 1990, there were more, but it was still so few. So the number has been growing and growing and growing of those who are actively involved in the movement. Things like 40 Days for Life, things like Operation Rescue brought a lot of people in. The growth of pregnancy health centers, the statements by Catholic bishops and Catholic priests building upon Catholic teaching have been very strong and good. Things like and Pope John Paul II was phenomenal. Pope Benedict XVI, and quite frankly, I know some people have their difficulties with Pope Francis from time to time, but what he says about abortion is very powerful and very profound. So the support of church leaders, the hierarchy, the growth, the influx of Protestants into the pro-life movement has been very
Yeah.
good as well. I think and there's a long way to go. We're not even close to where we need to be as far as church involvement is in this issue, but
Absolutely.
it's so much better. We're light years ahead of where we were, 30 and 40 years ago. We still got to get light years further ahead.
That's so true. So, I mean, what other laws do you see as being very potentially dangerous? Like, I know that the FDA now they're sending out the abortion pill in the mail and things like that. What are your thoughts on that as someone who is out on the sidewalk and has seen this sort of progress, because you and I know that the abortion pill is actually statistically more dangerous for women than the actual surgical procedure. So what are your thoughts about that development?
Well, this is the area post-Dobbs that is the most concerning, and it is the direction we really have to deal with as a pro-life movement, outside of dealing with the politics of it. When it comes to the actual harsh reality of the killing of innocent children, the harm to women, all those things, this is the big one, and this is the big push of the abortion movement. Actually, I read recently a quote from a man who was responsible for bringing the abortion pill to the United States. And this is back around the year 2000. They were pushing this forward, and the FDA was about to allow for the release of it. And there was a report that came out about somebody who died from the abortion pill. And this man said the best thing that could have happened in that situation. Now, this is a guy that wants it to be. He said the best thing that could have happened in that situation was 9/11. Because the news of this woman dying from this abortion pill would have prevented the FDA from ever approving it. And he knew that. But because of 9/11, that news was completely eclipsed by what happened, in New York and Washington and Pennsylvania. So he said it was actually a blessing for him that 9/11 happened. That's his quote.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That
So
is
here we
wild.
go. Here we go. Now we're in 2022, 2023 actually now, and the FDA under the Biden administration, first they used the excuse. It was a horrible excuse of the pandemic to do mail order and in-person abortions through the abortion pill, and then Biden won the election and almost immediately started working to change things at the FDA. It was done very quickly, and the latest rule change they have is to allow for the prescriptions to be filled at pharmacies everywhere.
Right.
So up until now, the rule was that it would have to be a specialized process. You got to come in and get this thing at the abortion facility, or the abortion facility has to receive it and then send it out to you. Now all they have to do is send out a prescription too. the individual, and the individual can go to their local pharmacy and get it filled.
So like a woman doesn't even have to go in and have it determined how far along she
No,
is,
they're basing it upon her own understanding of her own body.
which so
And
many women have no idea how their bodies work.
well, they don't know if they're atopic. They don't know that. They don't know if they have an RH issue that would be serious problematic in taking the abortion pill. They don't know that. They don't know what other bodily complications they have within them that would be counter
Or even
to
I'm thinking like
taking
other
these pills at
drugs
all.
they might be
Right.
on. It's
Right.
like this is
Right.
wildly irresponsible and dangerous for women. And for as often as we hear pro-abortion activists talk about wanting it to be, wanting to serve women, for it to be safe for women to live the life that they want to live. To me, I get why maybe someone might think that this is I'm not saying I understand why somebody would think that abortion is okay, but I do understand. I could see the heart of someone who's saying, like, if I really believe that abortion is okay, then I should believe that women should just be able to have free reign access to it. I could see the sort of spiral in the thought. But to me, I look at that and I say, you don't care about women. You don't care about keeping them safe. You don't care about them having options, because you do everything in your power to make sure that abortion facilities are totally unregulated, not inspected. You make it almost impossible to ensure that physicians are the ones committing abortions, people who are trained to do this. All of these things they want to remove, which are things that actually keep women safe. I mean, the Gosnell case, to me, is just the perfect embodiment of what happens when abortion clinics are not licensed or inspected. The health department doesn't feel a need to follow up because abortion is a contentious issue. All of these things that are not helping women. And yet here we have another case where they're saying, well, this is for women. It's supposed to help women. And really, it's very dangerous.
Absolutely. And it's even worse than that, because the abortion pill, with the way it's now being so freely allowed to be mailed out and everything else, it becomes easy for those who are predators.
Yes.
Easy for
Yes.
those who have got nefarious reasoning
Yeah.
to obtain and to abuse, to the point of death. And it's death for the baby, of course, but it can be death for the woman too.
Yeah, we've seen
And
that
so, exactly.
already.
So, we've heard too often already in stories where, they're slipping the Mickey, but the Mickey happens to be an abortion pill
Right.
into a drink.
Mhm.
And there's even been at least one or two lawsuits around the country over that, where the woman won the lawsuit because a man caused the abortion of her child. She didn't want the abortion. So
Right.
there's that. There's the abusers, who are the ones that are trafficking children, trafficking women, and they want to keep them under their control. And part of keeping them under control is making sure they aren't pregnant. When they become pregnant, it isn't for very long, so they
Mhm.
can keep making the money they make off of them in this trafficking process. And it's all covered up. Nobody knows it's
Right.
happening,
Planned Parenthood
and
doesn't
on and on.
report statutory rape even. So why would
Yeah.
they report any suspicious, you know, I mean, and we've seen that Lila Rose has done some great undercover work with live action, kind of
Yeah.
exposing the abortion industry in this area. And it's also interesting too, because they always claim that, like, if a woman chooses to reverse course with her abortion, that the abortion pill reversal process, that having a woman receive progesterone to sort of reintroduce that nutritional supply to the child, that's somehow dangerous, even though that's exactly how we treat women who are at risk for miscarrying their children.
Right.
It's just
Right.
also dishonest and backwards. So for you, Brian, as you look at all of this, what are the things that you would like someone to take away in terms of why pro-life activism is so essential, and how we can do this in a way that glorifies God? Like that's what I want for this podcast. I want people to see ways that we can draw near to our Lord. And I think abortion, addressing this issue, is just one of those most obvious and important ways that we can draw near to our Lord at this time and focus on building up the kingdom of God?
Well, I think, first of all, people need to be bold in their proclamation for life. They need to be willing to speak up. There's a timidity that is out there because I don't want to upset my sister. I don't want to upset my cousin. I don't want to upset my aunt, my uncle, my niece, and my nephew, whatever the case might be. Therefore, we don't speak the truth. Now, there's a way to speak the truth without being intentionally offensive. And sometimes we can be intentionally offensive without intending to be intentionally offensive. And what I mean by that is we say it in a manner that isn't intended to bring them in. It's just to say starkly, you are absolutely wrong. And even though they are absolutely wrong, that doesn't win people over.
Right.
It's just like, we run into these folks that will come out from time to time out to the abortion facilities. And instead of engaging in sidewalk counseling like we do, they come out and they say they're preaching the gospel. And what they're doing is they're condemning people in their sins. You're a horrible sinner. Don't do this. You're sinful. Don't, and you're going to sin more if you sin, and it's murder and things like that. And they say all those things. That is not preaching the gospel, because the gospel is good news. Preaching the gospel is telling of the love of God. Preaching the gospel is letting people know that God has something amazing for them. Now, sin's involved and needs to be repented of, but you start with that. And I love it.
That's super funny. Sorry.
That's perfect. So, so it's the same thing when we talk about abortion. We don't want to hammer people with it.
Right.
But we still need to speak truth. We still need to speak boldly. We need to defend the unborn, even with those who don't want to hear that truth. So there's a lot of good that has to be done in that way.
Thank you so much for sharing that. John is very upset because I turned off the TV for them. Anyway, well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. You are just an unsung hero in the pro-life movement, and I hope that everyone listens to this and yeah, there's Veronica.
There she is.
Has this renewed sense of urgency for ending abortion in our country. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, our website is PLAM, short for Pro-Life Action Ministries, PLAM.org. So you can go to our website and get all the information needed about what we are doing and how to contact us.
And make sure you donate to the great work that Brian is doing. Thanks again for coming on, and we will chat soon. God bless.
God bless you.